So Adam, what's the loudest you've ever been yelled at in your life?
Probably my mum when I was a kid and I moved all my stuff from my bedroom in the attic all the way to the living room for no reason.
Oh, Adam. The Queen's Guard, aka those guys with the big fuzzy hats who stand outside Buckingham Palace looking all stupid, are amongst the most respected and well-trained soldiers in the entire British Army. As you'd expect people to be able to wear and look good in the incredibly difficult to pull off combo of an assault rifle with a red jacket, the Queen's Guard aren't inclined to fuck around.
Yeah, the Queen's Guard's just like known worldwide for just being those like statues that just stand guard. It's not true.
Yeah, there's a lot of myths about the Queen's Guard, and the number one we should address, I think it's the first one that members of the Guard like to address, is that they are in fact allowed to move, contrary to what, pop culture has told you. My favourite example of this being, obviously, the film Shanghai Knights, because it's got Jackie Chan and Owen Wilson in it. And mostly just for Jackie Chan, but it's that moment where, these guys aren't allowed to move, and then he touches him, and then the guard, hits him in the nuts with his gun. And that's another myth. It's like they're not allowed to move unless you touch them. The truth is they're allowed to move whenever the fuck they want. They just choose not to. And as well-trained soldiers, they're of course able to ignore most outside stimulus that tries to distract them, such as loud foreign tourists yelling at them, and or people taking goofy selfies next to them. And before we move on, Adam, do you have a favourite example of the Queen's Guard in fiction?
I think it'd have to be Mr. Bean. There's one bit where Mr. Bean comes face to face with one, and he does everything in his power to make him move. And there's one.
That's the famous joke about it, isn't it? Where it's like they're not allowed to move, and you always have the moment where the person in the TV show, the film, whatever, tries to make them laugh and usually fails.
There's just one moment though where Mr. Bean's literally doing what he can, and the Queen's Guard just quickly looks at him, and you just see the nerves as Mr. Bean just takes it too far.
And I wonder whether or not that was a genuine, moment of corpsing from that actor, because it reminds me somewhat of the scene in Life of Brian. You aware of that film at all? And the bit where it's the biggest dickus scene.
Yeah, biggest dickus.
And you have those guards that are stood off to the side, and the story behind that is that, I think it's John Cleese or one of the other Pythons, went up to the actors playing those guards and went, look, if we find you laughing during this next take, you will be fired. Do not laugh, do not smirk, do not do anything. Stand still and just show no emotion. And that's why, during that scene, the extras playing those guards are just Bradley Walshing it the fuck up of just...
What about you? Do you find it visible? When I say the name... Dickus.
And we should clarify, they weren't going to be fired if they laughed. It's just the Python thought the best way to get the funniest reaction out of them would be tell them they can't laugh and then try and make them laugh, which is always funnier than a person breaking down. And I'm wondering if it's a similar thing with that Mr. Bean bit where the guy was told not to move and then just did, and they just left it in the takes. It was funnier.
All I'm imagining now is the guys in the biggest dickus scene with just Bradley Walsh's face as he's about to cry.
Can we do that? Whoever edits this one, just do whatever you can for that scene to just insert Bradley Walsh just fucking losing it.
What about you? Do you find it visible?
Does Bradley Walsh have the best, I'm trying not to laugh but making a really bad go of it, face out there?
Yeah, because his chin literally tucks into his neck so far.
It almost gets to the point of when Homer eats that super sour ball in The Simpsons and his entire face folds in on itself.
Known as 77X42, like, where the hell is the candy?
Speaking of which, can we also find a way to put that shot into the biggest dickus scene as well?
Do you find it visible?
I mean, I know it's a myth that they're not allowed to move, but I bet it's some proper rigorous training to actually, because they stand in that kind of box for a long time, obviously stretching their legs.
They do, yes, and although they can move if they want to, they're told, in no uncertain terms, don't, unless it's absolutely necessary, because the idea is you are standing guard, and people who don't know, the Queen's Guard are amongst the best trained soldiers in the entire British Army, because they are chosen from the best of the best of the best. And it's somewhat akin to the guards of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, You familiar with this at all? Where they are chosen from like all branches of the military, and you have to have a flawless, like practically perfect record to even be considered. And then to become a guard, you have to pass a 100-point inspection check of your uniform, of which you have to get a 98 or higher to be considered. And in the spirit of you can never actually be perfect, you should always strive to improve. They never hand out a perfect score, so you in reality have a single mistake you can make.
I know it's like detailed to the point where even like the method of your shoelace tying.
Yes, it comes down to that.
A point. Yeah.
And they get stuff like, they get a set square out to measure like the distance between your buttons, and then there's a load of other crazy stuff like for the first month that you're training, you're told to ignore furniture. And you have to stand up and you have to walk through furniture if it's there. And then there's stuff like you have to remember 3 full pages of history about the cemetery, including all punctuation. And Queen's Guards have similar levels of just intensive training to to be able to just stand still. Because it doesn't sound difficult to stand still. Try standing still for 4 fucking hours without moving or showing any sort of emotion. And I think nothing sums up how intense the training to become a Queen's Guard is, more than the fact if they need to go to the toilet when they're on duty, they're told just piss your pants. And their uniform is actually designed in a way to conceal this, because they wear multiple layers of clothing, including very, very dark trousers, which part of the reason for that is in case you piss yourself, the stain doesn't show. And it gets just a little bit more insane, because I didn't think this was true until I looked it up, because I thought this sounds like one of those things people make up about the Queen's Guard. Do you think that they can't move, or you can only move if you touch them? That they are trained to faint to attention. Have you heard this myth at all? They're trained that if they faint, they have to remain stoic, stiff upper lip, British to the end. They have to faint to attention, standing up straight. And no, they actually are. And that's why there are presumably examples of which behind me, pictures of Queen's Guards that have fallen over, and they fall over in a perfect fucking straight line.
Jesus.
And they're told not to help each other because you're not allowed to move. And what happens is they just come out and drag the body away, and then give the medical assistance away. And if they're marching and someone falls over, they have to march over their mate. That's how intense that it is.
So the article's called "The Queen's Guard Don't Give a Fuck."
Yes.
So what is it that makes them not give fucks?
Well, it's largely got a lot to do with those myths that we just talked about. The ones about, they're not allowed to move unless you touch them, and they have to remain perfectly still at all times. And a lot of tourists try and test this. And as I mentioned earlier, the guards are allowed to move if they want. And this surprises a lot of tourists who are doing shit annoy them, because they don't think, they're not allowed to react. It's they are. They're just trained to ignore you to a point. And what that point is left largely to the discretion of the individual guard. But it almost always terrifies the shit out of the person that they respond to. And there is this list of things a Queen's Guard is allowed to do to somebody who is being overly annoying or intrusive. It starts with stamping their feet and standing to attention. And this doesn't sound that scary until you realise that this is accompanied by the soldiers screaming as loud as they can to leave them alone. And you see a video clip of it.
Get off the fence!
And he stamps his feet, and you can hear him stamp his feet from 20 fucking foot away. And he screams so loudly. It's almost to the level of when Kid Boo screams so loud he rips a hole in a dimension. And that's the first thing the Queen's Guard do, to get people to shut the fuck up or leave them alone. But the Queen's Guard are allowed, if they so choose, to escalate a confrontation up to the point of pointing a gun at somebody.
Stay off the fence!
And I should point out that the guns the Queen's Guard hold are not decorative. They are real guns, usually loaded with live ammo. So when they point a gun in someone's face, it's not just an idle threat. I should also point out that because the Queen's Guard are tasked with protecting the sovereign, they are almost entirely above the law, and there is no court in land that would ever hold them to task for doing this.
Because they're protecting the Queen, these... and we've agreed, the hand-picked, these are the best of the best.
They are, yes.
They are not going to be afraid to pull that trigger.
They're not, no, because obviously their task is protect the Queen, and if they deem that someone is a threat to them, by extension, they are a threat to the sovereign's life, and anything done in the pursuit of protecting the sovereign is pretty much fair game. So when they point a gun at someone's face, If they pulled the trigger, they'd get away with it. And for anyone thinking that sounds like an overreaction, it probably is. But at the same time, these are the personal guard of the sovereign.
So Karl, I've got to know you, and I know that when you do your videos, and I think, he's done, you always produce the bonus fact.
There is, yes. The bonus fact for this particular story is like, in addition to basically just being able to do whatever the fuck they want and being fully empowered to point guns at people's faces if they feel that that response is appropriate, the Queen's Guard, when marching, are under no obligation to stop or slow down for a member of the public. And they are, in fact, told and encouraged to barrel straight through that particular person, as evidenced by this video of them doing that.
I mean, I just love this clip for the fact that he's not even facing him. He's just facing away, then suddenly just getting volleyed from behind.
They just barrel through him. I should point out for anyone wondering, like the only warning the Queen's Guard are, obligated to give is simply to say, make way for the Queen's Guard. They don't have to slow down, and as that clip shows, they will barrel straight through, but it gets a little bit better because in addition to that, they are also not obligated to help anyone they may injure by doing that. If you think that sounds harsh, it is, admittedly, but it goes all the way back to the early days of the British Empire where it was written in law that anyone carrying out duties on behalf of the sovereign is considered to be an extension of the sovereign's power. So, for example, the Queen's Guard when they're marching, impeding the Queen's Guard is akin to impeding the Queen, and the Queen's not going to fucking move out of your way. She doesn't slow down for you, you slow down for her. You are not slowing the roll of Lizzie at that point, are you? And what I don't get more than anything is why pop culture has perpetuated the myth that they're not allowed to move. Because to me, personally, it's way funnier that they are allowed to move, and that when they are moving, they're basically the juggernaut in that nothing's allowed to stop them.
Just before all this lockdown happened, me and Nisha went down to London with the family who flew over from America.
Okay.
And we went to Buckingham Palace, and one of the Queen's Guards was having a massive sneezing fit, but he was still stood in in attention, and he just saw his head just keep going,
just wobbling from side to side.
Oh man! Oh, they're like, oh, please wipe your nose or something like that. And he just carried on sneezing, and I felt bad for him. I was please.
Because we should point out that the Queen's Guard, while they are allowed to move if they so choose, they are penalised for moving if it is later deemed that doing so was not necessary. So when you have people going up to them and making funny faces, what they're trying to do is get that person reprimanded or even maybe fired. And considering how much effort they have to put in to become a Queen's Guard, that's a fucking dick move. So you can see why they take it so seriously.
It's kind of extended to street performers as well, the ones who act as human statues. When people are wet willying them and stuff like that, then you just turn around and get chinned.
Give me I can make him move.
Oh man, are they the best videos out there? Of you get the aggressive, and it's always the same kind of guy. And I think the description I've heard it put is it's the same kind of guy you see yelling at his wife in a car park in Aldi. And they'll go up to the performer and they will show a heroic amount of restraint right up until a hand is laid upon them, at which point, the Queen's Guard, all bets are off and you're getting fucking chinned. And what's always confused me about those types of videos is that the person, who gets hit always has the same reaction of how fucking dare you.
It just sums up society, doesn't it?
It does. And it's the ones you have of people interrupting wrestling matches and stuff and getting body slammed by the referee. Or when streakers get tackled by security and they get really indignant about it. It's what did you fucking expect? And I think one of the greatest compilations on YouTube, if it still exists and we can find clips from it, is just that one of not officials, not players, stopping streakers, but the mascots. I remember watching it back in the day, just a compilation of mascots just stopping streakers and match interruptions. And there's the famous one, I don't know what the guy's dressed as, but I want to think it's a big clam or something like that. And he just fucking suplexes somebody.
I think my favourite one is someone gets onto an ice rink and runs over to confront the referee, not seeing the linesman steaming in at 50 miles an hour. Linesman just goes absolutely through him, sends him into the barriers and everything.
There's a fan coming out on the ice. Oh, he was hit.
And the only response you can have to that is to just cheer. It's what did you expect? And you can translate that behaviour to the people we're talking about today who are I'm going to antagonise a trained soldier, and I don't see this as a bad fucking idea. It's what were you expecting?